Lee, you're muted.
Muted. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm Lee and Lee Guyan, and I'm your co-facilitator today, along with Jerry Stewart. And we are very excited to have these linked descendants who are going to be speaking with us today. I also want to encourage you, if you want, to put your name, where you're calling from, and the unceded native lands that you're living on today. I also want to thank Allison Thomas, who is hosting our Zoom today and is our tech support, and also Prinny Anderson, who has been the primary person coordinating these events for many, many years and is now sort of passing the baton over to those of us who are on the planning committee. So always a debt of gratitude to Prinny. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be introducing our linked pairs. And if you have questions for them, put them in the chat. We're also, after an hour, going to be taking sort of a 5-minute bio break that will also give you a chance, if you want, to put your questions in the chat. And Jerry will be reading those, and you can expand on those questions if you like. And then we'll have a summary at the end. So I'm going to begin with our first set of pairs, and which is Dr. Betty Kilby and Phoebe Kilby. And just briefly, their bios are here in front of you, but I'll briefly introduce them by saying that they found one another 17 years ago. And while researching her family, Phoebe discovered that her great-great-grandfather was an enslaver. And she also discovered that her father and Betty's father owned adjacent farms in Rappahannock County, Virginia. So Betty and Betty's father had both already published books about their experience in the civil rights movement, and with Betty's focus specifically about desegregating a county high school. So Betty was pretty easy to find online as she was a public figure. So Phoebe sent her tentatively an email, which she wrote on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day in January of 2007. And Betty wrote back, "We are the key to healing. We can not only contribute to Dr. King's dream, we can bring about racial reconciliation." And so their journey and reconciliation begin. So I'll turn this dialogue over to the cousins, Betty and Phoebe.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Phoebe Kilby. I'm starting here because between the two of us, I was the first to discover coming to the table. See, I had started a new job at Eastern Mennonite University in 2006. That is the birthplace of coming to the table. And this was about, when I came to work there, was about 6 months after the first coming to the table gathering. That's the first one where both Prinny Anderson and Tom DeWolf, for example, were among the participants. So hearing about this gathering, it inspired me to research whether my family had enslaved people. And I quickly found out that was true. And I also wanted to research or find out who might be living today who is descended from those slaves. I found Betty's website where she had advertised her autobiography, Wit, Will, and Walls. When I read her book, I found many clues that our families might be connected. But I also discovered something far more important. I discovered how she had been instrumental in integrating her high school right after Brown versus Board of Education. So on Martin Luther King Day 2007, I sent her this email, and the subject line was an invitation to conversation. Dear Betty Kilby Fisher, that was her last name at the time. My name is Phoebe Kilby, and I am white. My father grew up in Rappahannock County, Virginia, near where your father grew up. I have been doing some research on my family and have also read your book. Having no definitive answers, I suspect that our families must have had some kind of relationship in the past. I admire very much your courage and the courage of your father and family during the civil rights era and since. It would be an honor to talk to you and meet you someday. I live about 25 miles from Front Royal. That's where Betty grew up. Through conversations, we both might find out a little more about our family's past. Martin Luther King had a dream that the sons of former slaves and slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. Perhaps we as daughters can contribute to fulfilling that dream. I hope to hear from you and to hear that you're interested in conversing with me, Phoebe Kilby. Well, after waiting a few weeks, I finally did get a response, and the subject line of her email was, "Hello, cousin."
Well, Phoebe had suspected what I'd known practically all my life, and that was that I was descended from slaves and that I probably had white relatives. Therefore, it was only natural for me to respond, "Hello, cousin." But here's my response. Phoebe, if you're asking yourself why I am so emotional, the Cultural Innovations email address gets full of spam mail and is often down. I went to that site this morning and emails began to download. It could only have been God. We are the key to healing. Meeting you today is so awesome. People find it hard to believe. I can't believe it. I've always known that we were descended of slaves, but I couldn't open that door. We can not only contribute to Dr. King's dream, we can bring about racial reconciliation and healing to a nation of hurting people. I thank God for bringing you into my life. Signed, Betty Kilby Fisher. And I heard from Phoebe I was going around the world selling my book and talking about forgiveness and love. The last thing I expected was a white woman to challenge me to live Dr. Martin Luther King's dream. But here she was. I thought that was pretty gutsy. She didn't know me like that. I invited her to our family dinner, and she said yes. I forgot to tell my family that I had invited the white slave-owning Kilbys to our dinner and the premiere of the documentary to my story. Well, before the end of the time, I did call each one of them and tell them that who was coming to dinner. Our family was gracious, but there were a few mutterings like, "What are you looking for? How long are you going to hang around? Where's my 40 acres and a mule?" There was nothing my family or anyone else could say that could discourage Phoebe and me. After a memorable night at the premiere and the family dinner and introducing Phoebe and her sister as my cousins, I went home to Texas. I had custody of 2 of my grandchildren, and I had a busy schedule waiting for me. But Phoebe lived in Virginia, about 20 miles from my brother, James, who was the one who told Phoebe that white people come to the table, but they rarely stick around. Well, Phoebe was about to show us that she was committed. My brother had formed a group called the Historical Educational Movement to honor the 50th anniversary of the integration of Warren County High School. Phoebe asked if she could join that group. She worked diligent to support my brother as he sought to get a Virginia historic marker installed in front of the school that we integrated. We all were successful, and we were even able to get the school board to pay for the sign. Whenever I'm in Front Royal with my grandchildren or any of the family members, I always take them to see the sign. That's my bragging.
Well, it turns out that Betty and her brother James and I are a lot alike. We tend to be activists, and we're also comfortable doing public speaking. So when EMU staff started going to conferences to get out the word about coming to table and trying to drum up grant funding, they would take Betty and me along to tell our story. You know, initially didn't have much to say, but we stood there and said, "We're cousins." Anyway, We went to several conferences, the Gandhi King Conference on Peacemaking in Memphis and the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation Conference in Austin, and many of the early Coming to the Table national gatherings. Each time, we would share a room and meals as I offered information I was discovering about our shared ancestry. One time, I showed her some papers documenting her great-grandfather's marriage. Suddenly, she started crying, and I didn't know why. Well, it turns out I had copied a little note accompanying the marriage certificate showing that a man whose last name was Finks, he was vouching that her great-grandfather was old enough to marry. In other words, to get married, this white man had to vouch for this, for Betty's great-grandfather. Now, it turns out that at that time, the Finks family had employed her ancestors as sharecroppers. It was essentially de facto slavery. This note confirmed to her that how much the Finks had control over her family and took advantage of them. This was all very upsetting. I felt bad about upsetting her, but she appreciated this confirmation of all that she had believed as a child. Even difficult conversations are important.
Well, I joined the Coming to the Table executive board to work with Phoebe when she became president of Coming to the Table. Phoebe had already proved that she was serious about making amends for the past. Laying the groundwork for Coming to the Table did not draw from my strengths. However, my expertise was valuable for creating a sustainable organization whose focus was to bring together descendants of former slaves and former slaveholders. To help others, we had to be real. Form and fashion was out the window. Honest truth-telling was hard. I had buried my trauma to survive. Walking the circles of violence brought the trauma to a surface where I had to deal with it.
That was truly a meaningful experience when we talked about the STARS program, Cycles of Violence. Anyway, as Betty, James, and I got to know each other, we started to invite each other to family events and milestones. They invited me to their mother's 95th birthday party, and I attended many of James' guest preachings and his ultimate installation as a pastor at his own Baptist church. When my mother died, James came to her funeral. As time went by, I began to think that I should do something more, something to make amends personally for the harms committed by my family during slavery and since, including my own racism that I had absorbed as a child. Betty said, well, I asked James and Betty what they thought I should do. And Betty said, you didn't enslave anybody. You don't need to do anything more than you are already doing. I just couldn't let that go. There had to be something. Then it hit me. Education. What if I set up a scholarship fund to benefit descendants of persons my family enslaved? I took that idea to Betty and James, and they liked it. They had grandchildren who would benefit. So in 2014, with their counsel, I established the Kilby Family Endowed Scholarship Fund. For this 2024-25 school year, we have awarded 6 scholarships. Now I'm getting to know all the grandchildren.
When we were asked to write our book, we had lived the story, and it was simply a matter of documenting it. Each of us wrote our chapter and sent it to each other. I was living in my RV and writing as we traveled. The first draft came together in 4 months with little or no disagreement about the text. And when it came to the publisher, I always had trust issues, especially of white men. It was a white man who stole my daddy's land. My grandmother was taken by a white man. I was raped by white boys. This group of people set off triggers. The publisher, he couldn't even remember my name. And that was an automatic trigger. He wanted movie rights, and that was right up there with old man Dick Fink's stealing daddy's land. I had a hard time getting past that. Phoebe was less emotional. She had researched contracts and talked to a lawyer. She was agreeing with his terms, and that infuriated me. Today, as I try to negotiate with a self-publishing company for a second edition of Wit, Will, and Walls, I'm dealing with a white woman, and I find that I haven't changed a bit. There's always mistrust of anyone who tries to take my history.
Well, see, Betty was much more confident than me about getting this publisher to bend. I was worried that he would scrap the whole contract. But I also realized at the time, too late, that she was putting me and this white publisher in the same white camp, us against her. I can understand why she would do that after all the terrible things white people had done to her. But in the end, we were able to work it out and still be cousins and friends.
You know, the one thing that we have to remember is to be present in our conversation. I love my cousin Tim, and I love my cousin Phoebe. I find that it's not about white men. It's about an instinct in seeing people as who they are, as deceivers sometimes, and oftentimes someone who wants to take advantage of other people. All the proceeds from our book goes to support the scholarships for the descendants of my African-American ancestors. Not only will the descendants receive a scholarship for an education, they will get a complete history about both the Black and the white Kilbys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lee, you're muted again.
Allison, I'm so sorry. I've got a dog in the background. So I was saying thank you so much. And for sharing with us how you came together, all the positive aspects, as well as the some of the challenges and how you work through them. I'm going to introduce our next linked descendant pair, Allison and Leroy. And the bios, a summary of the bios that they sent us are here before you, so you can read a little bit more, but I'll make a brief introduction as well. Leroy Dawson and Allison Thomas met as linked descendants cousin back in the spring of 2021. Leroy had been researching his ancestors, and he knew from his mother's stories that his great-great-grandfather had been enslaved. After receiving his ancestry.com DNA results, Leroy began reaching out to blood relations. One of the positive responses came from Allison, who confirmed their connection through the Hudgens family of Gwynns Island and her Matthew County, Virginia slaveholder ancestors. Allison had been conducting genealogical research of her own since 2013 and connecting with linked descendants since 2016. So she was able to affirm her connection to Leroy, and they've been connected ever since, collaborating on reparative actions. And so we're going to hear from both of them now.
Okay, I'm going to spotlight us here. I'm getting better at this. Okay, so actually it was a little bit different. I had been kind of going through my dad on ancestry.com. I'd been going through my dad's matches, DNA matches to see. I was looking for descendants of a different family line actually, and I found Leroy's match to my dad, and it was incredibly high. They have a match of 90 centimorgans, which is the way you measure genetic matching. And most of the matches that we all come across, I think, are down like 10 centimorgans, which means they're much further back. So I knew this had to be a recent match, and I messaged Leroy on Ancestry and said, hey, do you descend from this family? Because his tree, he had a massive family tree. I could not figure out how we related. And he said, no, we matched through a different line. And that's when he told me that his great grandfather was Drew or Andrew Hudgen, but they spelled the name differently because the census taker kept rewriting the name, and sometimes it's spelled Hudgens or Hudgeon, which is really hard to. I wouldn't have even thought to search for that. And our family name is Hudgins. So Hudgens is one of those names that can be spelled a lot of different ways. So Leroy, when I sent the ancestry message, how did you feel?
I felt excited, and I felt just a whole lot of things went through my mind. I finally made it a connection with a cousin that I've been looking for, that solidified that we have relative in Virginia from the family story that my mom and my grandfather taught us about. We have cousins in Virginia. That's all we got, maybe Richmond County, Virginia, but not Matthew County or Gwynns Island. And so when Allison definitely reached out to me, I was excited, really excited. So right now I'm a little bit nervous too, so y'all have to forgive me a little bit. I'm not a pro
Okay.
at this.
We got all our family members watching. Shout out to all of our cousins and uncles and things. So what I had learned by this time was to ask Leroy what the oral history was in his family about Drew Hudgen. I suspected that he was related to my great-great-grandfather, William Holder Hudgens, because of the size of the DNA match, but I didn't know for sure. And of course, I kind of hoped he was going to relate to my great-great-uncle, Robert, who didn't marry until he was 40 years old. So I did ask Leroy what the oral tradition was that he knew. So why don't you share that, Leroy?
Only thing that I know about my family, like I said, is all word of mouth. That my grandfather was named Ed Hudgen, and his father was named Andrew Hudgen, was married to Amanda Kemp. And that's about all I know, that, the origin of my family, they were from Virginia. That's pretty much all I had to go on. So when I took the DNA test, it opened up a floodgate for me, a whole lot of different relatives and first cousin, second cousin. Then, like I said, when Allison's father popped up on my ancestry, there's a second to third cousin. And they're like, wow, this is very strong. So I kept digging. I think I kind of like I didn't quite understand the DNA at that time. And so it was all new to me. And so everything was just brand new. So but I kept digging, kept learning, kept asking questions, and just finally, like I said, Allison did finally email me back. And it was just wonderful for me. But as I got better with it, I started finding more relatives, and Allison said, well, let's try this. She put in the correct spelling of Hudgen. And so once she done that, it just really opened up so many opportunities, and cousins just coming from left to right. I mean, it was amazing.
So one of the stories that we knew, or Leroy had heard, was that Andrew was sold south, was the child of an enslaver and an enslaved woman, and was sold south from Virginia to Louisville, Georgia, slave market, which is right in the center of the state. So if he sold south as a child, it would mean that he was sold with his mother, which would tell us certain information in terms of the time frame, because we're trying to pin down the time frame to see what other records we could find. I have some family records of the Hudgens family, and so I was really hoping I could find information about Andrew, and more particularly about his enslaved mother, because that's the big gap. And it's a different story if Andrew is sold by himself, because then he has to be at least 8 years old. If he's sold with his mother, he could be sold as young as 1, 2, or 3. And of course, every record for Andrew, there's a different birth date. So you're dealing with these range of dates to figure things out. Unfortunately, our family records didn't yield anything. I had account books. My great-great-grandfather was a merchant, so I thought I'd be able to find these account books which my grandparents had donated to the Library of Virginia. And it would be so great if I could have found a page saying, the slaves I sold, and these dates, and here are their names, come on. Because he has, but what the records we have are just what other people owed him financially. I don't have anything even of who he's buying things from to sell, that we don't even have that side of the ledger. So, but DNA, we were able to confirm that William Holder Hudgens is our most recent common ancestor. So he is both Leroy and my second great grandfather, because we have shared matches. And what I noticed is on our shared matches all lean toward that ancestor, as opposed to my great great uncle. His descendants did not match as high as Leroy. And in fact, we had other cousins who are on this call, the Davidsons. Bill Davidson had a higher match to Leroy than my father. So it really confirmed that it was our family line, that was William Holder Hudgens. So then we decided, and this has now been confirmed. We're working with Connie Davis on our genetic genealogy. So she's confirmed that my hunch was right based on the shared matches. And now she's trying to help us use DNA to find Andrew's mother, whom we call Mary, because Andrew named his oldest daughter Mary. And our presumption or hypothesis is he's named her for his mother. And then we decided to meet, right?
Yes. And we met in San Francisco. That was amazing. So we landed in the plane in San Francisco, and well, at first it's like it was a television show that comes on with these I forgot the name of the show right now, but it was called Chinatown. And so I told Alice I want to go to Chinatown. So Alice said, yes, I used to work in San Francisco. And I said, great, you can show me around. She definitely showed me around. I mean, it was amazing. And so then we went out to dinner. That was amazing. And she just made me feel comfortable. I mean, it was a love that I cannot explain. And so that's pretty much how that trip kind of went for me. And she took me out to dinner. We talked more about the family, and she invited me to one of her family functions in Virginia, and I went to that, and that was amazing as well. I've got to meet a whole lot of different cousins I've never met and seen in my whole entire life. And everyone made me feel welcome. And that was a wonderful feeling for me.
So I'm going to
It
share.
almost got me to tears right now. And so, yes.
I wanted to share my screen right now because I've got a picture of our, here we go. We'll see if mine works like Jerry's. So this is a picture of Leroy meeting various members of the family, both Leroy and I. So the lower left picture is Leroy and I meeting in San Francisco. We met the first time, and then we had a reunion. And so Leroy came out to Virginia and met all the rest of the family. And then he subsequently has met another cousin that's in the upper right corner. And you can see the joy on everyone's faces at their meeting. And then we were able, this middle picture is taken in front of the William Holder Hudgens home. It did not exist when Andrew was born. This is the new house. It was built in 1895, and the antebellum house was torn down. But it still is the land that Andrew walked as a child. And there's a private cemetery at that house. So the picture on the left is Leroy standing next to his great-great-grandfather's headstone. And as we all said, can we hear the bodies rolling over underground, the rumble, And then the picture on the right is Leroy standing between the headstones of his third great-grandparents. So that's back another generation. And that's on Gwynn's Island. This is all in the Middle Peninsula area of Virginia. Matthews County is on the tip of the Middle Peninsula. You have to go through either Gloucester County or Middlesex County to get there. It's a very isolated area. But we had a lot of fun running around that day, visiting all the family houses.
Yes, it was wonderful.
So we thought we only have a couple minutes left, but we were going to talk about our one misstep. So in order to find the to find Mary, our quest for Mary, we need more DNA. And so I reached out to my family, and my Uncle Jim has helped me get a lot more DNA. And then Leroy's trying to reach out to his family. So he contacted some cousins, and we thought we would do a Zoom together, all of us together, to kind of talk through this history and walk through the ancestry records, census records all the way back. So we started in the present, and then I was clicking through census records, and everyone's very enthusiastic. But it was probably a mistake that I took the lead on that, and it was partly because of Leroy's less comfortable with ancestry. So it was, at the time, felt easier. And as we got back in time to reach the enslaved generation, it got much more tense. So Leroy, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes. One of my first cousin, her name is Joanne. That's my mom's sister, oldest child. And my other friend, her sister, Veronica, came online as well. And so Veronica felt, as what the first couple was talking about, trusting white people was one of the issue that a lot of people in the South, I'm gonna say in the South, feel that it's trust is a very important thing. It's about trust. And so if someone treats you a certain way, or you feel that you can't trust that person, it's feel like it's all over again, like the young lady was saying about the 40 acres and a mule. And that's how Veronica was feeling, that she felt that she had to defend. My grandfather was talking about land grants. And that's kind of like where it went sideways at with us, and I didn't want Allison to feel that everybody in the family felt that way. It was just one isolated situation. I've talked about Allison to pretty much hundreds of my relatives about her. And so far, I mean, like I said, it was just that one incident with, how can I put it? And said a nice way, it's, if you don't understand how you had to be raised in the South to really feel this, I mean, to understand what I'm trying to say. But at the same time, but I didn't want Allison to feel that that she was doing something other that was bad. I wanted to feel that it's a good thing, and not make her feel that she's liable for something to happen before she was even born. I wanted her to feel that she can be trusted. We can trust her. And I wanted her to feel, like she's part of my family here in Georgia.
And I think that, Leroy's in Georgia and I live in California, but the family's all in Virginia. I think what I realized is Leroy heard these stories and had awareness of this because his grandfather was Andrew's youngest son. He was born in 1901 and didn't die until the 90s. So Leroy knew him really well, but in other branches of the family, they hadn't heard the stories. They didn't know some of this as well. So we're kind of marching through a story which we are familiar with, and we know that it means that there is people who are enslaved. Obviously, Andrew's the product of a rape. Things were rough. We traced the likely enslaver of Andrew when he was sold in Georgia. But I think those were all much harder and more difficult material to hear for the first time. And I was so used to Leroy's comfort with us talking about, because to us, it's a mystery we're trying to solve, and we're kind of deep into the weeds on it. But when you step away from it, it's brand new. So we wanted to highlight that because I think that could have been handled in probably a more sensitive way. And even just the language can be difficult.
Yeah.
As well.
Yes.
You somewhat heard from Betty, I think, too.
Yes.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our time. There's questions later, so I'm going to remove our spotlights and turn it back over to Lee. Okay, Lee.
All right, and this time I'm unmuted, so I'll jump right in. So could we, Jerry, have the slides back with the bios?
Jerry had to log back in, so I don't know if she's hearing us. She's
Oh,
off
well, Jerry,
camera.
I think okay. So what I want to do when Jerry is back in, that our next speakers, Ann and Pam, had requested that we read as that we read verbatim the bios that they had.
Oh, I don't think that's necessary.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
No.
Because I thought, given what you're going to be doing with your poetry, that that it might be helpful, and it's only about a minute.
Okay. Okay. Whatever
And
you think.
so,
I just didn't want you to feel like you had to.
oh, no, no, no. I wanted to give everyone sort of a little bit of an intro here. But I didn't print that out. I was just going to read it right from the shared screen that was going to be put up here for us. So, and Allison, so you said Jerry has to get back
Jerry-
on?
Yeah, she looks like she got kicked out again. I don't know what's going on. She must have something unstable.
Oh, okay. I understand.
And I think I
Yeah.
might.
Yeah, so that's okay. So, give me 1 second here. I might
There
be,
we go.
is Jerry back?
Lee,
Yes. So should we just?
it's
go ahead?
Prinny. It's Prinny, and I have a
Oh, I
copy
have
of,
it here. Okay, I've got it. I'm sorry. So let me
Okay.
go ahead. Thank you. Is that okay? So I have it on my phone here. So, hey, okay. So, we can go ahead and have the two of you up here as highlighted, but briefly, I'm just going to say to everybody that, we have, Ann and Pam. Pam Smith. Pam Smith is a native Chicagoan and a public historian. And she served as a research consultant for historic sites and museums and as resident historian at Richmond Hill, a historic monastery and retreat center in Richmond. Okay. There she initiated the Judy Project to honor African people formerly enslaved on the land. Earlier in her career, Pam served as communications director for Reverend Jesse Jackson in his 1988 presidential bid and for Barack Obama in his primary campaign for U.S. Senate. She is a producer of the soon-to-be-released documentary Current, A Descendants' Journey for Truth, and we're going to be putting the GoFundMe site in the chat for all of you who are interested in learning more about it and also perhaps contributing to that. Ann Neal is a professor emerita of sociology at University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington, where she taught for 28 years and served as coordinator of women's studies before retiring to Sonoma County, California. In 1981, she began an extensive research project on women's lives in the early 19th century households of enslavers who settled in Randolph County in the Little Dixie region of the mid-Missouri, among whom were some of her own ancestors. Besides copying records for African Americans doing family history research in the region, Ann used this experience to enrich her classes on slavery, racial conflict, and gender inequality, and to assist students in doing their own family histories that she required in each class where appropriate. Because of this research, Pam Smith was referred to Anne in 1990. And so that was quite some time ago. And here you are to share the backstory and how you got from there to here.
Right. Thanks, Jerry. I mean, Lee, I'm sorry. What we think about when we talk about this is partly that being linked descendants is a very special kind of relationship. And everybody brings different things to the situation, both in how they get together in the first place and their own past experiences, their expectations, their skills, all those different things. And so in thinking about this, we thought, well, we can't really tell people what to do or how to do it really, because it's so unique in what each person brings to the situation. So Pam and I can really only talk about our own experience, but it may reflect something for the rest of you. We've had a very long relationship, I think over 30 years, as linked descendants and subsequently as friends and colleagues and all manner of, not always getting along. We've even tried to write a book together that, congratulations to Betty and Phoebe. They managed to do it. We worked really hard and haven't managed to do it. We have a lot of files. And we also tried to make it into a documentary more recently. I even worked for Pam once as a researcher in her consultant business. So we've had a lot of experiences. One of the things we've done is been very passionate and persistent in trying to keep things going, and trying to keep understanding each other, why we do things. And I really appreciated your discussion, Allison and Leroy, about the struggle that you had. And also, Betty, you were talking about the same kind of thing, about the question of trust, and we'll get to that. So I guess that is to say that not everybody would feel comfortable being in a linked descendant relationship and going to the level of struggle that we certainly have, and we haven't always felt comfortable with it either. And we've also had laughter and a lot of times of comfort and joy. What we'd like to do in this next part is give you a taste of some of the depth that we've gotten to using some issues that came up in our linked descendant relationship. And then we're going to read some poems we wrote to each other when we could not even speak to each other. Okay, Pam?
So I was really excited to meet Anne. I was doing my own research and had called to the courthouse in Missouri. And I was asking, are there any other sources that I can pursue? And they said, you might want to contact Professor Ann Neal, just because she's done a lot of research in the same area. And so not thinking there was any connection between us, just, you might want to call her. So I called, and it was instantly, we were boop, 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 boop. Just had a lot in common. And we became genealogy buddies. But then I wrote in a poem later that one day, all of that fell like an axe to a block of wood. It just was we reached such a tense moment. But that has not been the majority of the 30 years, I would say. The majority of the 30 years has been a deep and enduring, I would say, friendship. And in a lot of different ways, people say, well, what kind of friends are you guys? I would say one of the things that comes to my mind, number one, is our shared kind of worldview. So we spend a lot of time talking about current events, and we have for 30 years. Like that's been a central part of our relationship. And we always made time for each other. Like we would go every year, I would go to California, or she would come to Chicago, even sometimes when we weren't working together on a presentation or trying to do the book or whatever, just because we enjoyed each other's company. She encouraged me to go back and do graduate work, kind of kept persisting on that. And recently I was in her wedding, red appointment or wedding with Cynthia. So our friendship has been wide and deep. And
Well, one of the things that I think was striking is how we always talk about things we've read, things we felt, etc. In the early days, as Pam mentioned before, we were on the phone, but it was probably a year or so into that before we even met each other. It's just like when Allison and Leroy came together and met each other, it changed things. I mean, it was like a major shift. And I remember this was about 1993. We'd met in 91, and Pam had arranged to get herself, as she often does. She's very, very good at making new plans, new projects, new moves into the world, especially searching. And in this case, she wanted to go to Africa, and she got herself a position teaching little kids in Burundi. I believe that's right. And so she was going to come out from Chicago, where she lived, to my place where I lived in Tacoma. And I mean, I'm sorry, she was going to come out to Portland to see her mother. And I talked her into also coming to see me in Tacoma because, my God, we ought to meet each other. And I was all excited. Pam was coming and I was going to meet her. And she pulls up to the curb and I go over to meet her. I remember this so well. She got out and she was quite reserved. And I thought, uh-oh, this is not going to be easy. We managed to go up to the house and everything, and we're talking. We're being cordial, as we say, about all kinds of black-white connections. We're cordial, with all its implications. We had lemonade, we started talking genealogy, and pretty soon we're the same lively people that talked on the phone. And that I breathed a sigh of relief for a moment. She started asking me a bunch of questions, and I said, let's
wanted
go
to know.
down. Well, we went down the basement where my study, and I said, I want to record this. And I recorded this long conversation in which basically Pam interviewed me. She wanted to know, how come you got into race relations? How come you ever were in sociology?
Well,
And
I really
I'm like,
wanted to know about how did your family think about Black people?
absolutely,
How,
all of
you know,
it, what kind of background I had and everything. And at the end of it, when I typed it up, I had it typed up by the secretary. I didn't do it. It was too long. I titled it Pam's Interview of Anne, which is what it really turned out to be. In any case, one of the things that came up in that conversation is we were talking about slavery. And I said, one thing that really amazes me and puzzles me is because why were Black people ashamed of having been slaves? It should be the white people that are ashamed. And Pam said, do you want to say what you said?
well, I said, it was, from my point of view, it was pain that people were feeling, not so much shame. But then you were talking about the generational aspects. So.
Well, yeah, because she also mentioned that her also in high school and her friends, they were into Black power, Black is beautiful. The kids at the baseball game, basketball games were putting their arm up like in the Olympics, etc. This,
Well, no, we didn't really put our arms up, but we stayed seated. We didn't pledge allegiance. This is what we do.
Yeah.
We didn't pledge allegiance to the flag. We didn't feel like the flag. So when that whole thing was done, we
that
just
was
sat
right,
quietly.
right.
Yeah.
In any case, when she said that, I thought, that makes a lot of sense because I'm 20 years older than Pam. She had a whole different high school experience, a whole new world of consciousness had come up, and etc. And it was after that that the issue of shame came up another time.
And then we should get to the poems, and just because I'm
Yeah.
watching our time. Yeah.
She reminded me that as a white interviewer, I said that a lot of the people that I'd interviewed in Missouri, I'd just been there and was interviewing older Black people to see if their memories match with my records that I'd copied. And they often mention shame. And when you read WPA slave narratives, they talk about shame. And later, Pam told me, yeah, she ran into shame, unfortunately. But it was about our age difference that was part of. Anyway, okay, that's what I
You want
have.
to talk about, you want to start with Vashon and then we'll go into the poems?
Sure. One of the days when Pam came to visit me, we were working on taping our conversations, because by this time we'd given many presentations, and people always say, when are you going to write the book? And we'd say, are we going to write a book? And so we thought we'd tape our conversations, and we did. And I'd been asking Pam a lot of questions, and I kind of felt like she was getting tense, and I said, well, it seems like we should take a break here and everything. And she went back up to stay. I had a little cabin in the back of my house that she was able to stay in. So she went away, and a whole series, a poem bubbled up in her.
Yeah, so I was in this place and I couldn't really figure out what I was feeling. And I probably write like one poem. I'm not a poetry writer much, but I probably write a poem every year when I just feel so deeply about something I can't express it any other way. And so it's called Wasteland, an Ode to Entangled Lives. Entangled Lives is the name of our presentation. So when we didn't have time to talk about much, we did tons and tons of conversations on college campuses and TV stations. And we have a whole story about a drama thing with Oprah that involved an apology that if we have time, maybe later we can talk about. But anyway, this is Wasteland, an Ode to Entangled Lives. I am not amused by pain. I want to ball you up like a messed up piece of paper and throw you out of my life. Can you believe that? And can you be that? A piece of garbage like your ancestors might have treated mine. Okay, I'm calm now. Like a good girl, I've buried my rage and disbelief 6 feet under the same earth where my grandmother rests. So far, I can't even find it. And like feathers from a chicken in a breeze heading south, I've let go the rage. But dear God, please don't make me suffer a friendship. Why must any part of this feel good? Reconcile, beckon the voices from my past. Untangle, advance. How goes the soul in its dignified plan? To every person, their conscience, for every moment, an opportunity lush with hope. Like Kilimanjaro, hiked up Kilimanjaro, like Kilimanjaro on a rainy day, through the mud, over the danger zones, on toward the summit.
The next day, Pam brought me this poem, and I read it, and I asked Pam, is this personal? Are you writing this to me as a generic white person, or is this about me, Anne? And after we had a little fight, I wrote this. It's called On Being a White USN. So it seems I'm blind and deaf, a wasteland of unconsciousness. It's genetic. Perhaps I wandered into this wretched place by accident should flee for my life. Is this place inside me or am I inside it? Both, it seems, ambivalent, gutless wonder. Unfortunately, this is it. My only me, my only chance, and ours. And it's not funny. Then Pam replied,
In Wasteland too. I lied. It is personal. You are that piece of paper, and that, my dear friend Anne, is the legacy of our connected past, forever etched into my being, like a name on a tombstone made of granite. I cannot reconcile it. We cannot change it. And the great revelation is, I want to keep it. I want to save a space for my ancestors and a part of me that you can never go. Our friendship is as deep as the ocean blue, yet more delicate than a floating lily on a stormy day. My absolute best is to live within the context created by the past and try to smooth it over time, like waves to the rocks they move. May our living be the teller of our tale.
hardcore. Yesterday, I trudged up the driveway, placing one fierce foot in front of the other, my aching gut a flat desolation. I thought we were friends, could be friends, in spite of the staggering, stinking burden of debt my ancestors had left me. I'd thought, in spite of their sins, I had socially redeeming value, more or less. No way. My stomach roils and heaves. Reaching the road, I pace around and around in circles, sending the cage panic out through my legs and feet, stomping gravel to dust. Now what? Hardcore.
Well, looks like
Is she
Anne is,
frozen? Yeah.
she's frozen.
So
No.
we're the ones. Why? Let me speak for myself if that's acceptable. Okay, I asked for this. I went looking. I must have thought I really was doing something. Really teaching, really thinking, being real about race and not academic, even, mind you, facing descendants. I thought that was frightening itself and was quietly proud of my courage. I had met descendants of people my ancestors had enslaved before Pam, before I knew Pam, and brought history like cookies, visited and went away without having to listen to any possible rage or suffering or hatred. So now, as linked descendants, Pam and I are peeling back layer after layer, relentlessly exposing the wounds of slavery's past, and our feelings rise, boil like the surface, and must be lanced. Now, hear this, Anne, it's totally personal because everything about you, your personality, your conditioning, your attitudes, and your behavior, certainly your heritage is white, fundamentally, generically white, with all its gross, obscene meanings. You are a child of the colonizing enemy. To really befriend you is to betray my own profoundly violated people. I wasn't shocked to hear this as a statement of generic rage. I know that rage exists. Why wouldn't I? After all, I teach reluctant students to face it and not be demolished or debilitated by guilt, to do something worthwhile about it instead. And instead, I just fought in disbelief at first, then in argument and confusion that it was really piercingly about me. The sweet and safe promise of friendship and mutual understanding is a crucial piece of this project of God knows what. Otherwise, there would be no pain. Can I listen, hear her hatred, her rejection, her honesty, which is authentic and therefore kind of loving gift tied up in a tangle of what feels like misinterpretation? Is it odd that I kick and scream? If I had to answer for all my father's sins, I would be in hell, precisely where this tunnel seems to lead. Am I willing to stay this righteous path? Yes.
And again, this metaphor about Kilimanjaro, entangled lives is about about choice and consequences in the past and today, about an overwhelming passion for racial understanding, peaceful coexistence, and even harmony. Why else would we choose the horrific climb over the soft green grass beneath our feet? Improving race relations is not an inevitable task, something we have to do, like going to work every day. It's a choice, like choosing peace over war. Further, it's an individual choice, with each one asking, what must I do? Just as the process with family history, we start with ourselves and move outward. What is my present position? What is my past? How were my attitudes formed? Who must I become? Anne and I are nowhere near the mountain summit. This was written many years ago. You're closer now, but we're climbing poli-poli, as the Swahili term goes, slowly, slowly, one foot in front of the other, most times helping each other along the way, sometimes hoping the other will fall, giving us both a reason to relent. Hope is our lifeline. We hope we can make it. That's as far as our expectations can go. We know that now. Thank you for listening.
Mm. Oh, thank you both so much. Oh, just, the comments in the chat for you and all of the presenters are goosebumps and cheers, many, many thank yous, gratitudes, lots to ponder. Whew, what an hour. We have scheduled in a bio break, and I think also maybe for 5 minutes, time to just be quiet and reflect if that's necessary on what we've heard and learned, and from our linked descendants today. But I'm sure that you all have questions, maybe about your own research, your interest in connecting with a linked descendant, or perhaps you have done so with positive results and maybe some challenges. So we'd like to have a 5-minute break and then come back. If you have questions, please put them in the chat so that Jerry will sort of read them to everyone. And if you need to expand on those yourself,